Hi everyone, welcome to Woodfired Weekly at Manna from Devon Cooking School. This week we're going to be talking about cooking bread in a Dutch oven. Why should we bother? What's the advantages? What are the disadvantages? How do we do it? How do we avoid burning our hands? All of that super stuff. We're going to be cooking it in the Morso Forno. We're going to be challenging ourselves to cook a large loaf of bread. So I've got a 1.5 kilo loaf here, which is going to take 50 minutes to 1 hour to bake. And we've baked plenty of small loaves in the Morso Forno, which take 20 minutes or so. And as we Morso Forno owners know, you can keep a stable heat for 20-25 minutes, but much more than that, and you have to keep the fire burning. If you keep the fire burning, then the heat is typically sort of fluctuating and it's fairly uneven from one side to the other. We've got our normal setup in the Forno, so we've got fire on one side, lots of space to cook on the other. But obviously that means the oven on the left hand side here is hotter than the oven on the right hand side, and we've got some fluctuations in heat, and neither of those are ideal for baking. And that's where a cast iron pot, a Dutch oven, can come into its own, because a cast iron pot actually transfers some of the heat itself, so it evens out some of that unevenness in temperature. And if the temperature of the fire drops, because the cast iron itself is retaining some heat, the temperature that you're cooking at doesn't drop at the same rate, because now you start using some of the heat from the oven. So we can balance things out. Also, cooking any bread in a Dutch oven means that you're cooking it in a very enclosed space. That means it stays very humid. As steam comes out of the bread, it's got nowhere to go, so it stays around the bread. That keeps the crust soft and allows the bread to rise much, much more. So you typically get a better rise. So I even use a Dutch oven when I'm cooking inside in my direct domestic electric oven. So I've got a few examples here to show you. We've got the Morso cocotte here, and this is very heavy. This is the heaviest of my three, and the benefit of having thick cast iron is that it does that job of evening out the heat, transferring the heat around itself and retaining heat so it's stable, better than something which is slightly thinner and lighter. So this one here, which is what you would think of as a regular sort of casserole pot, but it's a little bit thinner and a little bit lighter and doesn't transfer the heat quite so evenly. Still going to do the job. Importantly, both of these have got a nice firm seal on the lid, so when there is steam inside there, it doesn't just spill out. So something with a loose old lid wouldn't work as well. I've also got this really lovely cast iron enamelled Danish pan, slightly smaller this one, so this is probably okay for a 750 gram loaf. The benefit of this one is I can use it either way up. So I can put the bread in there and put the lid on, or I can put the bread on there and I can put the base in. And it is actually sometimes slightly easier to have it like that, because it means you're not having to reach down into this pot to do anything. With this one, I can't really sit it on the base, so I've got to lower my bread into the pot. And to help me do that, I've made this little piece of silicone here. It's been used a few times, you can see, with handles, so I can put my bread on there and lower it into the pot, thus avoiding burning my hands on the edges. For a number of years, I used to just reach in with my hand and place the bread in there, and then I'd inevitably catch my hand on the side and burn my hand. And you won't believe how long it took for me to come up with this very simple solution. So now I use that all the time. With the Morso pan, I can use it this way up, or this way up. But in this case, I've got the grill cocotte, with the ridged lid. So if I sat a dough directly on there, it would sort of sink into those rather, and give me a rather odd bottom. So what I do with this one is just line it with a couple of thicknesses of silicone, and that just evens the weight of the bread out sufficiently that I don't get a problem with that. And that's the setup we're going to use in this oven today. So let's just talk about the setup we've got in the oven here. Fire over on the left hand side, burning quite brightly at the moment, keeping everything nice and hot, so that this side, the surface of the oven, well above 300 degrees, 396, 340 over there, which means over on the other side of the oven, nicely above 200 degrees. I've got a flue thermometer, magnetic, over there reading 300 degrees. Over here, 240 degrees there. And if I've got that temperature on the outside, sort of 275, 300, something like that over here, I reckon that the inside air temperature is going to be kind of 240, 250. And that's what we're looking for to bake bread, in a nice sort of 240, 250 temperature. Inside the oven, I've got a larger version of the Morso grill cocotte. So this one will easily take this 1.5 kilo loaf, and I've had it in there preheating for half an hour or so. So I've got plenty of heat in the pot itself as well as around it. And then I'm going to keep feeding the fire throughout the bake so that we keep the temperature up, and we keep the temperature over on this side nice and hot. So we're pretty much ready to go and put our bread into the pan. And this is the bit which is a little bit tricky, but once you get into a routine of doing this a few times, you'll see that it's fine. I have to bring the pan out, take the top off, put the bread onto the pan, cut it, put the lid back on, put it back into the oven. A little bit more difficult than putting it onto a peel and sliding it straight into the oven, but only a couple of steps more, and you'll see the benefit later on. Here you can see the silicone I've got in the bottom, just protecting the base of the bread from those ridges. Now I'm going to pop the bread out and straight onto that base there. Score the bread. Back on with the lid. And I always leave those slightly separate from each other, so it's easier to get my fingers under there and lift the lid off later. Slide that back into the oven, and it's better towards the back. The temperature will always be a bit hotter towards the back. And back into the oven with a nice bright fire burning. We've left the air gap open here so the fire can get plenty of oxygen and keep burning. But the door is in place, so the temperature builds and stabilizes behind the door. So I think that loaf, that big 1.5 kilo loaf, will require 50 minutes to 1 hour to bake. We're going to give it 30 minutes enclosed in the cocotte, enclosed in the Dutch oven, keeping it nice and humid, getting a lovely rise, evening out the temperature. And then the final 20 minutes without the lid on so that the crust can brown up. Our loaf has had 30 minutes, so I'm going to bring it out. Have a quick look, make sure we haven't burnt it, undercooked it. That looks fantastic. You've got a tiny bit of scorch just here and a tiny bit here. That's where it actually touched the outside of the pan. The underside looks lovely. I'm not expecting that to be cooked yet, and it's certainly not, but it looks brilliant. So I'm now going to pop this in without the lid, let it dehydrate, let it cook through for another 20 minutes, and now I'm going to just leave the bed of embers as they are. So it'll still be nice and hot in there. I'm going to close the door completely because now we don't need a lot of air getting through to keep the fire burning, and that'll keep the heat elevated. So another 20 minutes and then we should be done. Our bread's had almost another 20 minutes, so 50 minutes in total. And just to let you know, that was this works for any kind of bread you're cooking. So we're not talking about the specific sort of bread recipe that I was doing today necessarily, although for those of you who are interested, it's just a kind of rustic loaf, 40% wholemeal, 60% white flour, 60% white flour, 40% wholemeal flour, salt and yeast, cold water, fermented overnight, a couple of hours on the table, overnight in the fridge, taken out and put into a basket early this morning, and it's had about 4 hours in the basket, rising and coming back up to temperature. We'll put all those notes and details in our blog anyway. So let's have a look and see if we're cooked. And that looks perfect. Lovely on the bottom, nice colour. And that's sounding much better now. So I'm very happy with that. 1.5 kilogram loaf, baked in our fluctuating in temperature, uneven in temperature, Morso oven, but nevertheless looking fantastic. So that's a quick run through of how to use a Dutch oven generally and how to use a Dutch oven in the Morso to even out the temperature and even out the fluctuations. If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe to our YouTube channel where we produce a new video every week. We'll provide recipe and notes for this video on our blog and put a link to that below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.